Hey everybody. I wanted to take it's a part of my voice because I'm just a little under the weather. I wanted to take just a couple of minutes and talk about Essay 1, which is due this week. I know maybe some of you are kind of struggling and trying to figure out how do you need to set up this essay. So the essay prompt was to discuss the impact of third person narration in the three stories that we read so far, which were The Story of an Hour, A Rose for Emily, and Soldier's Home. And so I want you to think about that kind of in the vein of like, how does it aid third person narration? How does it aid in the development of the main character and how we, the reader, interpret the story? And so, if you have been kind of watching my screencast and reading my text notes, third person narration has been very critical in each of these stories. Um, and that affects the way that we, the reader, read and interpret the story. Think for just a second how the stories would have been different if we had gotten them from a first person perspective from the main character. For example, from Miss Mallard's story, if we'd gotten it from her perspective, we may not have been able to view her as as a sympathetic character. If we'd heard it from her point of view, we wouldn't have known about the heart condition, which kind of foreshadows everything that happens at the end. We also would not have been able to see her outside, from an outside perspective, as we see her openly grieve for her dead husband, and she carries herself to her room to be alone, and she sinks down into a chair in sorrow. We wouldn't have seen that kind of stuff from her perspective. Um, we can only see that from an outside view. We would have kind of thought she was very selfish, that maybe she was just putting on an act for the people that were in her house. And once she was alone, she realizes that she's happy that he's dead and now she's free, and so on and so forth. So, having that third person perspective in the story of an hour really helps us to view her as a sympathetic character. We feel sorry for her. We feel sorry for the fact that she's lived, maybe not as much of an oppressed life as a suppressed life, where she has not had her own identity in her marriage, and she is actually thrilled that she may get that opportunity now that he is dead. Um, if we had heard the story from Miss Emily, and I want to point this out, if you listen to my lecture on the point of view in the narrator, we talked about unreliable narrators, whether they be inexperienced, like a naive narrator, or someone who is crazy or not in the right frame of mind to accurately portray events. Both Miss Emily and Rose for Emily, and even Krebs in A Soldier's Home, both are unreliable narrators. If we'd heard the story from their point of view, Miss Emily, here she is. She refused to give up her father's body after he died, because she didn't want to be alone. And then we find out that she kills her lover, and probably even worse than that, she keeps him in her house for 40 years in an upstairs bedroom. Um, and then to add just a whole other notch to that, she actually sleeps, and not in this not a sexual context, but she sleeps with the body in an embrace every night. And we know that because of the gray hairs that were found on the pillow. And so, if we'd gotten it from her point of view, her perspective, it would have definitely been a crazy story. But the fact that we see it from the outside, from an outside perspective, and we see how the townspeople, her serving as that collective we voice in the story, they didn't judge her because they felt she had to do that. She didn't want to be alone, and so she clung to what she could. And when we view it from that perspective, we do get that very sympathetic vibe for Miss Emily and what she's gone through. And even though it's crazy, and there are probably way better ways and more legal ways to do that, we still get to feel sorry for her. And we're also kind of impressed by her, the fact that she is just this one woman army standing up to all of her enemies as well, which we wouldn't have gotten from her perspective. In Soldier's Home, here's Krebs. Poor guy. He experiences one of the craziest and worst battles of World War One. But it actually happened to also be the turning point for World War One. But the psychological damage and the PTSD that Krebs is experiencing is very much real. When he returned home much later than all the other soldiers, there was no hero's welcome mat rolled out for him. Nobody seemed to even care that he was there. And so here he is, he's trying to process everything that's happened to him. And then no one cares. It's a lie to get people to even be interested in what's happened to him. People want him to get over it. People want him to get a job, find a woman, move on. Enough is enough already. But all Krebs wants to do is come home, and for home to be what home was before. And unfortunately, home will never be home for him anymore because of what he has gone through. And so that third person, that detached style of narration in the story really helps us to get a very unique perspective on Krebs and what's happened to him. And we feel sympathy, we feel sympathetic for his plight, because he just tries so hard, and it seems like he's just given up trying to be home. And so what we have to do now is, it's not enough that we discuss each of these stories individually. We have to find a common thread that runs through each story to kind of tie it all together for an essay like this. So I've kind of given you this graphic that I just sketched out a couple of minutes ago, just to kind of help you maybe start the train of thought, just like you did with your CTE. You have to come up with a claim that is your overarching thesis, what you intend to prove, and it needs to be very specific, and it needs to be very direct. Don't be vague. What is the common thread that links all three of these stories together in relation to third person narration? And there are many threads that you could choose. Some of you may have already formulated one of your own, but third person narration provides us with a lot of necessary information for each of the stories that we would not have gotten from first person perspective. So that might be a vein that you want to chase. Third person narration allows us to be sympathetic with the characters of Mrs. Mallard and Miss Emily and Krebs, when we normally, or when we wouldn't have been if we had read it from their first person point of view. And third person really gives us, this 360 view of each of these characters, inside and out, that allows us to understand it better. So those are three threads that you can tie these three stories together, because they are all very different. So paragraph 1 will be introduction. In your introduction, you want to name all three stories, and you want to also name your authors by first and last name. And so you can do that in a sentence. The third person narration in The Story of an Hour by Kate Chopin, Rose for Emily by William Faulkner, A Soldier's Home by Ernest Hemingway. You can do that in a sentence where you identify those three stories and those three authors as well. And then you also want to identify the three characters that you're going to be discussing in that introduction. So Mrs. Mallard, Miss Emily, and Krebs. And then you also want to throw your claim in there, maybe the last sentence before the rest of your essay starts. So think about that, how I told you how to formulate a claim. How can you turn this prompt into a claim for these that you intend to prove? So paragraphs 2, 3, and 4 will be for your stories. So typically in literature, we do them in order of author's last name. And so the way that I have them laid out for you here on this kind of info sheet is the correct order because Chopin, Faulkner, and then Hemingway. Then you don't remember that you don't have to continue to refer to your author by first and last name. You can just use the last name in each of the paragraphs to reference the author. So paragraph 2, The Story of an Hour, Miss Mallard. What's the impact of that third person narration on Miss Mallard? And you remember it needs to connect to your thesis. So whichever it is what common thread it is that you decide you want to use, say for example, if it's how do we view third person narration helps us view Miss Mallard in a sympathetic light, then your evidence, your two pieces of textual evidence should support that claim. Same for paragraph 3 with 2 pieces. Same for paragraph 4 with 2 pieces. You can use a balance, again, of just like you can in that we discussed earlier, of paraphrase and textual evidence. But at least one of those pieces needs to be a direct quote. And you really want to shoot for the best quote to support your claim as possible. Now, can you use more? Absolutely. But the more you use, the more you have to explain as well. So be careful that it doesn't get out of control so that you're writing these ginormous body paragraphs and just a small introduction and a small conclusion. You want to aim for an overall balance. Okay, so once you've done your 3 body paragraphs, then the logical 5th paragraph is your conclusion. That's where you want to tie everything together, restate that claim or thesis that you proved through your body paragraphs. And remember that each of those body paragraphs is like a baby CTE or a CTE. You've got your claim up already in your introduction, but those paragraphs should be the second and third parts of each of your CTE responses. So paragraph 2, you have your claim up in paragraph 1 in your introduction, and then the story of an hour should be textual evidence, followed by an explanation of how that textual evidence links back to the claim in the introduction. Okay, don't state any new material in your conclusion. That's the time where you bring everything together and provide closure for your reader. As always, if you have questions about these essays or anything that you're doing, please don't hesitate to contact me. I will be glad to answer your questions, look at things for you. It's very hard for me. I have a lot to read usually, but I never mind reading paragraphs, just skimming them to see if you're on the right track. You can share them with me in Google Drive through my kloyd.pv@ccboe address that I gave you at the beginning of the term in your email. And I wish you luck, and I look forward to reading what you come up with.